If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe for more. My name is Clara. I'm 28 years old, and until 3 months ago, I believed that family meant unconditional sacrifice. Today, as I write these words in my small apartment 200 miles from home, I realize how wrong I was. The truth is that I spent the last 10 years of my life being my younger sister Emma's substitute mother, while our biological mother lived her own life as if she had only one daughter instead of two. I was 18 when our father died in a car accident, leaving behind a grieving widow and 2 daughters, who suddenly had to navigate a world that felt too big and too cruel. What I didn't expect was that grief would transform my mother into someone I barely recognized. She retreated into herself, finding solace in wine bottles and romance novels, leaving me to pick up the pieces of our shattered family. Emma was only 8 then, with pigtails and gap-toothed smiles, needing someone to pack her lunches, help with homework, and tuck her in at night. Without thinking twice, I stepped into that role, believing it was temporary, that mom would eventually come back to us. But temporary stretched into months, then years, and before I knew it, I had become the primary caregiver to a child who wasn't mine. I postponed college, worked double shifts at the local diner, and watched my dreams slowly dissolve like sugar in rain. Every morning, I would wake Emma up, make her breakfast, walk her to school, and then rush to work, only to come home and help her with homework, make dinner, and listen to her stories about her day. I loved her fiercely, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself completely. My friends moved on with their lives, got married, had careers, traveled the world, while I remained stuck in a role I never chose but couldn't abandon. The breaking point came last spring, when Emma, now 18 and graduating high school, announced she wanted to go to college across the country. I was proud of her, truly, but what happened next revealed just how twisted our family dynamics had become. Instead of supporting her decision, my mother panicked, not because she would miss Emma, but because she realized she would be left alone with responsibilities she had avoided for a decade. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Mom looked at me with those tired eyes I had grown accustomed to and said something that still echoes in my mind. She told me that maybe it was time for me to find my own place, that Emma needed to learn independence, and that it would be good for everyone if I moved out. At first, I thought she was joking, but the silence that followed made it clear she was serious. Emma sat there, fork halfway to her mouth, looking between us with confusion and growing horror. She had never known a world where I wasn't there, hadn't considered that I might have my own life to live. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of me completely. For 10 years, I had been the glue holding our family together, the one who remembered birthdays, scheduled doctor appointments, attended parent-teacher conferences, and provided emotional support during Emma's teenage years. I had been the one who stayed up all night when she had nightmares, who taught her about periods and boys and heartbreak. I had been her mother in every way that mattered, except biologically. Yet now that she was ready to leave, they were ready to discard me like I was nothing more than a temporary babysitter whose services were no longer needed. The conversation that followed was surreal in its cruelty. Mom explained that she had been thinking about dating again, that she wanted to redecorate the house, maybe get a smaller place since it would just be her. She spoke about her future plans with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years, plans that clearly didn't include me. Emma tried to protest, saying she didn't want me to leave, but even her objections felt hollow, like she was going through the motions of caring without truly understanding what it meant. I excused myself from the table and went to my room, the same room I had occupied since I was 18. Surrounded by the same furniture and the same dreams I had put on hold for everyone else's comfort. That night, I stared at the ceiling and realized that I had become invisible in my own life, valuable only for what I could provide to others. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in emotional manipulation disguised as family concern. Mom would alternate between guilt-tripping me about abandoning the family and cheerfully discussing her plans for redecorating my room into a home office. Emma, caught between her excitement about college and her dependency on me, would oscillate between treating me like her personal assistant and expressing worry about my feelings. Neither of them seemed to grasp the fundamental injustice of the situation, how I had given up my 20s to raise a child who wasn't mine, only to be dismissed when my usefulness expired. I started paying attention to things I had previously ignored, like how Emma would automatically turn to me when she needed something, even when Mom was sitting right there, how Mom would defer parenting decisions to me, claiming she trusted my judgment, when really she just didn't want the responsibility. How family friends would praise me for being such a devoted sister, never questioning why a young woman had sacrificed her entire adult life for this devotion. The more I observed, the more I realized that I had been systematically trained to be the family's emotional caretaker, to prioritize everyone else's needs above my own. When Emma got accepted to her dream school, the celebration felt bittersweet. I was genuinely happy for her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that her success was built on my sacrifice. That her bright future was only possible because I had dimmed my own light. During her graduation party, I watched Mom beam with pride, accepting congratulations as if she had been the one guiding Emma through high school. I stood in the background, taking photos and serving cake, invisible despite being the one who had made it all possible. That night, Emma came to my room to thank me for everything I had done. She sat on my bed, looking so young and vulnerable, and told me she knew she couldn't have made it without me. For a moment, I thought she finally understood, that she would acknowledge the magnitude of what I had given up for her. Instead, she asked if I could help her pack for college and maybe drive her there in the fall. Even in her gratitude, she was still asking for more. Still expecting me to be available for her needs. The final straw came during a family dinner in late June. Emma had been accepted to several colleges and was trying to decide between them. Mom, in one of her rare moments of parental engagement, was offering advice about choosing the right school. As they discussed Emma's future, I mentioned that I had been thinking about going back to school myself, maybe taking some online courses, to finally get my degree. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked at me as if I had suggested something completely absurd. And Emma's face showed a mixture of confusion and mild irritation. Mom was the first to speak, asking who would help Emma transition to college if I was busy with my own studies. Emma chimed in, expressing concern about how I would manage both school and helping her with her adjustment to college life. The assumption was clear. My role was to facilitate their lives, not to build my own. When I pointed out that I was 28 years old and had been putting my education on hold for a decade, Mom dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand. She said there would be plenty of time for me to go back to school later, that family came first, and that Emma needed me now more than ever. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I sat there feeling like I had been erased from existence. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I started researching apartments in distant cities, looking at job opportunities, and imagining a life where I could be Clara the individual, not Clara the substitute mother. The planning process was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had never lived anywhere but my childhood home, had never made decisions based solely on my own desires. Every apartment listing I viewed felt like a small act of rebellion against the role I had been forced to play. I started saving money secretly, taking extra shifts at work and selling items I no longer needed. The process of preparing to leave felt like slowly untangling myself from a web that had been woven around me without my consent. Each step toward independence was accompanied by guilt, but also by a growing sense of excitement about the possibility of discovering who I really was. July passed in a blur of secret preparations and mounting tension. Emma was busy with college preparations, constantly asking for my help with everything from choosing bedding to practicing her introduction speech for orientation. Mom had started dating someone she met online, a development that simultaneously vindicated my decision to leave and made me feel even more replaceable. I watched as she put effort into her appearance and social life that she hadn't shown in years, confirming that her withdrawal from family life had been a choice, rather than an inability to cope. The man she was seeing, David, seemed nice enough, but his presence in our house felt like another sign that I was being pushed out. He would arrive for dinner dates while I was helping Emma with college applications, and Mom would breezily announce they were going out, leaving me to handle the evening routine I had managed for years. During one particularly surreal evening, Mom asked if I could babysit Emma while she went on a weekend trip with David. I stared at her in disbelief, wondering how she could still think of Emma as needing a babysitter at 18, and how she could so casually ask me to watch over the house like I was the hired help. That weekend, as I sat in the living room with Emma, who was sprawled across the couch watching Netflix, I realized that this was what the rest of my life would look like if I stayed. I would be the perpetual backup plan, the reliable one who could be counted on to handle whatever crisis or inconvenience arose. Emma would go to college, but I would remain available for her emotional crises, her holiday visits, her eventual wedding planning. Mom would continue her relationship with David, but I would be expected to maintain the household and provide stability. I would grow old in this house, watching everyone else live their lives while mine remained perpetually on hold. The thought filled me with such despair that I had to excuse myself and cry in the bathroom. That night, I finalized my decision to leave. I had found a job in a city 3 states away. A position at a marketing firm that offered exactly the kind of opportunity I had been dreaming about. The apartment I had chosen was small, but mine, with a window that faced east so I could watch the sunrise each morning. August arrived with an intensity that matched my emotional state. Emma's departure for college was scheduled for the last week of the month. And my own secret departure was planned for the day after she left. The coordination required to manage both transitions without revealing my plans was exhausting. But I had become expert at managing complex situations without support. I helped Emma pack her belongings, offering advice about what to bring and what to leave behind, all while secretly packing my own life into boxes I hid in the garage. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was facilitating her independence while planning my own escape. During those final weeks, I paid attention to every detail of our family dynamics, memorizing the patterns that had defined my adult life. I watched how Emma would ask me for help with tasks she could easily handle herself, how Mom would defer to my judgment on household matters while simultaneously planning my displacement. I observed how neither of them seemed to consider what I might want or need, how my desires were always secondary to their comfort and convenience. The emotional labor I had been providing for years was so ingrained in our family system that they couldn't imagine functioning without it, yet they were simultaneously eager to reorganize their lives around my absence. One evening, as I helped Emma organize her college supplies, she mentioned how much she would miss having me around to help with problems. When I suggested she might want to learn to handle things independently, she looked at me with genuine confusion, as if the idea of not having me as a safety net had never occurred to her. She asked if I would visit her at college, maybe help her move into her dorm room the following year, and drive her home for holidays. Each request felt like another thread in the web that had kept me trapped. Another expectation that my life would continue to revolve around her needs. I smiled and gave noncommittal answers, but inside I was screaming at the assumption that I would always be available, always willing to drop everything for her convenience. The night before her departure, Emma came to my room for what she called our last sister talk before she left. She thanked me for being such an amazing sister, and told me how much she loved me. Her words were genuine, but they were also filled with the casual expectation that I would continue to be her emotional support system from afar. Emma left for college on a Tuesday morning in late August, and the house felt immediately different without her presence. Mom had taken the day off work to drive her to campus, and I had volunteered to stay behind to begin the transition to our new normal. Except there would be no new normal for me in this house. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I began executing the plan I had been developing for weeks. I loaded my car with the boxes I had hidden in the garage, making multiple trips to transfer my entire life into my vehicle. The process was methodical and surprisingly quick. Years of possessions condensed into a few carloads. I left behind most of the furniture, taking only the items that held personal significance or practical value. Each box I loaded felt like shedding a layer of identity I had never chosen, revealing the person I might have been if I had been allowed to develop naturally. I had written letters to both Mom and Emma, explaining my decision and my reasons for leaving without a confrontation. I knew that if I tried to explain my choice in person, they would find ways to guilt me into staying, to convince me that I was being selfish and ungrateful. The letters were honest but not cruel, explaining how I had felt invisible and unvalued, how I needed to discover who I was outside of my role as their caretaker. I left Mom's letter on her bedroom dresser and Emma's on her desk, where they would find them when they returned. By the time I finished loading my car, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard where I had spent countless hours playing with Emma when she was little. I stood for a moment in the driveway, looking back at the house that had been both my prison and my sanctuary, feeling a complex mixture of grief and liberation. The finality of the moment was overwhelming, but underneath the sadness was a current of excitement about the unknown future that awaited me. I had no idea who I would become without the weight of everyone else's expectations, but I was ready to find out. The drive to my new city would take 8 hours, and I had planned to drive through the night. Arriving at my new apartment as the sun rose on my new life, the drive through the night was surreal, like traveling through a dream landscape that shifted from familiar to unknown as the miles accumulated. I had made this journey in my mind so many times that the physical act of driving felt both anticlimactic and monumentally significant. As I passed the city limits of my hometown, I felt a physical sensation of release, as if invisible chains were falling away with each mile. The radio played a mixture of songs that seemed to narrate my journey. From melancholy ballads that made me cry to upbeat anthems that made me feel invincible. Somewhere around midnight, I stopped at a 24-hour diner for coffee and realized that this was the first time in years that I had made a decision without considering how it would affect Emma or Mom. The simple act of choosing what to order felt like a radical act of self-determination. The waitress, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a tired smile, asked if I was traveling far. When I told her I was moving to a new city to start over, she smiled and said it sounded like an adventure. Her casual acceptance of my choice felt like validation that what I was doing was normal, that people moved and changed their lives all the time. I had been so immersed in my family's dysfunction that I had forgotten that most people don't spend their entire adult lives sacrificing for others. The conversation with the waitress lasted only a few minutes, but it reinforced my decision, and reminded me that there was a world full of people who didn't know me as Emma's substitute mother, or the family's emotional caretaker. As I got back on the road, I felt a surge of anticipation about meeting new people who would know me only as Clara, who would form opinions about me based on who I was rather than what I had done for others. The hours passed quickly as I drove through the darkness, my headlights cutting through the night like a path toward my future. I thought about Emma settling into her dorm room, probably calling Mom to report on her first day, and felt a pang of sadness mixed with relief that I wouldn't be the one she called for every small crisis or celebration. I arrived at my new apartment as the sun was painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Exhausted but exhilarated by the symbolism of starting my new life with a sunrise. The building was modest but well maintained, with a small garden in front, and large windows that promised natural light throughout the day. As I carried my boxers up to the second floor, I marveled at how different this felt from every other move I had made, which had always been about family necessity rather than personal choice. My new landlord, Mrs. Chen, was waiting with keys and a warm smile, welcoming me to the building and the neighborhood. She didn't ask about my family or my reasons for moving, treating me simply as a new tenant deserving of basic courtesy and respect. The apartment was small but perfect, with a kitchen that overlooked the street, a living room with hardwood floors, and a bedroom that faced the morning sun. As I stood in the empty space, surrounded by boxes that contained my entire life, I felt a profound sense of ownership and possibility. This was mine, chosen by me, paid for with money I had earned, decorated according to my own preferences. I spent the first day unpacking and arranging my belongings, making decisions about furniture, placement, and color schemes without consulting anyone. Each choice felt significant, a declaration of independence from the communal that had defined my previous life. When I hung my favorite painting above the couch, I realized it was the first time in years that I had decorated a space according to my own taste rather than family consensus. That evening, as I sat on my couch eating takeout Chinese food, my phone buzzed with the first of many messages from home. Mom had found my letter and was calling repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from confused to angry to pleading. Emma had sent a series of text messages expressing shock and hurt, asking how I could abandon her during such an important time in her life. I read each message carefully, but didn't respond immediately. Needing time to process their reactions and formulate my own responses, the messages from home continued for days, each one revealing more about how my family perceived my role and my value. Mom's voicemails were particularly illuminating, cycling through the stages of grief with remarkable speed. She was angry that I had left without discussion, hurt that I hadn't trusted her with my feelings, and confused about how the household would function without me. What struck me most was her assumption that I would eventually come back, that this was a temporary rebellion rather than a permanent change. She spoke about me like I was a teenager, acting out rather than an adult, making an informed decision about her life. Emma's messages were more complex, mixing genuine hurt with practical concerns about who would help her navigate college challenges. She asked who she was supposed to call when she had problems, who would remember her birthday, who would give her advice about relationships and careers. Her messages revealed how completely she had relied on me for emotional support, but also how little she had considered my own needs and desires. Reading her texts, I felt the familiar pull of guilt and responsibility, the voice in my head that said I was being selfish and abandoning people who needed me. but I also recognized these feelings as the very chains I had been trying to break. The emotional manipulation that had kept me trapped in a role I had never chosen. I spent hours crafting responses that were honest but not cruel. Explaining that I needed to build my own life while reassuring them that I still loved them. Told Mom that I hoped she would continue developing her relationship with David and pursuing her own happiness, just as I was pursuing mine. I told Emma that I believed in her ability to handle college challenges independently, and that our relationship could evolve into something healthier and more balanced. The process of responding to their messages was emotionally exhausting but also clarifying. Each interaction reinforced my decision and helped me understand the dynamics that had kept me trapped. I realized that their shock and hurt were genuine, but they were also rooted in an assumption that my life belonged to them rather than to me. Weeks passed, and gradually the frantic messages from home began to subside. Mom started dating David more seriously, and her voicemails shifted from demanding my return to updating me on her new relationship. Emma found her footing at college, making friends and joining clubs, and her texts became less frequent but more mature. She began handling problems independently, discovering that she was more capable than any of us had realized. I watched these developments with a mixture of pride and vindication, realizing that my presence had been enabling their dependence rather than providing necessary support. Meanwhile, I was discovering who I was outside of my role as family caretaker. I started my new job at the marketing firm and was surprised by how much I enjoyed the work and how naturally it came to me. My colleagues saw me as competent and creative qualities that had been overshadowed by my domestic responsibilities. I began taking evening classes at the local community college, finally pursuing the education I had deferred for so long. Each class felt like a gift to myself, an investment in my future that no one could take away. I made new friends who knew nothing about my family situation, who related to me based on shared interests and mutual respect rather than obligation. For the first time in years, I had conversations that weren't about solving other people's problems or managing family dynamics. I discovered that I was funny and intelligent and capable of forming relationships based on equality rather than caretaking. The person I was becoming felt both foreign and familiar, like meeting a childhood friend after years of separation. I began to understand that the sacrifice I had made for my family wasn't just about time and opportunities, but about my fundamental sense of self. I had spent so many years being what others needed that I had forgotten who I was beneath all those expectations. The process of rediscovering myself was sometimes painful, but it was also exhilarating. I felt like I was waking up from a long sleep, seeing colors and possibilities that had been invisible to me for years. Part 12, 3 months after I left. Emma called me for the first time since I had moved away. Her voice was different, more mature, and self-assured, and she wanted to talk rather than ask for help. She told me about her classes, her friends, her struggles with independence, and her growing understanding of how much I had done for her. She apologized for taking me for granted, and said she was learning to handle things on her own. The conversation was the first real discussion we had ever had as equals, and it gave me hope that our relationship could evolve into something healthy and mutual. Mom called a few days later with news that she and David were getting engaged. She seemed genuinely happy, more vibrant than she had been in years, and she credited my departure with forcing her to take control of her own life. She admitted that she had relied on me too heavily and that my leaving had been a wake-up call about her own responsibilities. She asked if I would come home for the wedding, and I found myself genuinely excited about the possibility of visiting as a guest rather than a caretaker. The wedding planning became an unexpected bridge back to my family, but on completely different terms. Instead of being expected to coordinate everything, I was consulted as a valued family member whose opinion mattered. Mom would call to ask my thoughts on flowers or venues, not because she needed me to handle the arrangements, but because she genuinely wanted my input. The shift was subtle but profound, marking a new dynamic where I was included rather than utilized. Emma volunteered to be Mom's maid of honor, taking on responsibilities I would have automatically assumed in the past. Watching her step up and handle wedding-related tasks with competence and enthusiasm filled me with pride and validated my decision to step back. She was discovering her own capabilities, just as I had hoped she would when I left. The person I was dating, Michael, worked as a graphic designer at a company down the street from my office. We had met at a coffee shop when I was struggling with my laptop and he offered to help. What struck me most about him was how he saw me simply as Clara, without any preconceived notions about who I should be or what I should provide. Our relationship developed naturally, based on mutual attraction and shared interests rather than need or obligation. When I told him about my family situation, he listened without judgment and supported my decision to prioritize my own growth. He had never known me as the family caretaker, so he related to me as an individual with my own dreams and ambitions. Dating him taught me what healthy relationships could look like, how two people could support each other without losing themselves in the process. For the first time, I was in a relationship where I wasn't expected to be the giver, the fixer, the one who sacrificed for the other person's comfort. Michael encouraged my education, celebrated my work achievements, and never made me feel guilty for putting my own needs first. Through his eyes, I began to see myself as someone worthy of love and respect, not because of what I could do for others, but simply because of who I was. The contrast between this relationship and my family dynamics was stark and illuminating. I realized how much I had normalized unhealthy patterns, how I had confused love with sacrifice and care with control. Learning to receive love without earning it through service was a skill I had to develop consciously. There were moments when I would automatically defer to Michael's preferences or try to anticipate his needs before he expressed them. Old habits. That died hard. But he would gently redirect me, encouraging me to express my own opinions and make my own choices. The process of unlearning codependent behaviors was challenging but liberating. I was discovering that I had preferences and opinions that existed independently of other people's needs, that my value as a person wasn't tied to my usefulness to others. 6 months into my new life, I received an unexpected call from my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson. She had heard through mutual acquaintances that I was finally pursuing my education and wanted to congratulate me. During our conversation, she mentioned something that stopped me in my tracks. She said she had always wondered what had happened to me, that I had been one of her most promising students with clear college potential. But I had disappeared after graduation. She had tried to reach out a few times over the years but had never been able to connect with me. Her words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were unkind, but because they confirmed something I had suspected but never fully acknowledged. I had been seen and valued as an individual with potential, but I had allowed that identity to be erased by family circumstances. Mrs. Patterson asked if I would be interested in speaking to current students about perseverance and following dreams, even when life takes unexpected turns. The invitation felt like a full-circle moment, an opportunity to transform my experience into something meaningful for others. I agreed to speak at the school's career day, and preparing for that presentation forced me to reflect on my journey in new ways. I realized that while my story involved sacrifice and lost time, it also demonstrated resilience and the courage to change course when necessary. Standing in front of those students, many of whom were facing their own family pressures and expectations, I felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. I talked about the importance of setting boundaries, about the difference between helping family and losing yourself in their needs. Several students approached me afterward, sharing their own struggles with family expectations and fear of disappointing others. Their questions and concerns reminded me of my younger self, and I found myself offering the advice I wished someone had given me at 18. The experience was transformative, shifting my perspective on my past from pure loss to valuable wisdom that could benefit others. The wedding took place on a crisp October day, and returning home for the celebration felt surreal. The house looked different somehow, brighter and more organized than I remembered. Mom had redecorated several rooms, and the changes reflected her renewed energy and David's influence. Emma greeted me at the door with a hug that felt different from our previous interactions, warmer but less desperate, the embrace of an adult sister rather than a dependent child. She had grown up noticeably in the months since I had left, carrying herself with more confidence and speaking about her college experiences with genuine enthusiasm. David turned out to be exactly what Mom needed, someone who encouraged her independence, while providing emotional support. He treated her as an equal partner rather than someone who needed to be taken care of. And their dynamic was healthy in a way I had never seen her experience before. During the wedding preparations, I was struck by how smoothly everything functioned without me. Emma had organized the rehearsal dinner. Mom had handled all the vendor communications, and extended family members had stepped up to help in ways they never had when I was available to do everything. The realization was both validating and slightly painful, confirming that my presence had been enabling rather than essential. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful and intimate, filled with genuine joy and celebration. As I watched Mom exchange vows with David, I felt a complex mixture of happiness for her new beginning and grief for the years we had all lost to dysfunctional patterns. Emma gave a touching speech about family resilience and new beginnings, acknowledging both the challenges we had faced and the growth that had come from those experiences. When she mentioned me in her speech, thanking me for my sacrifices while also expressing pride in my courage to build my own life, I felt a sense of closure and acceptance that I hadn't expected. The reception was relaxed and joyful, with dancing and laughter that reminded me of family gatherings from before Dad's death. I found myself genuinely enjoying the celebration, participating as a guest rather than the organizer, and feeling grateful for this new chapter in our family's story. The months following the wedding brought unexpected developments in all our relationships. Mom and David settled into married life with an ease that surprised everyone, including them. She called me regularly, but our conversations were different now, focused on sharing news and experiences rather than seeking solutions to problems. She had learned to handle household management, financial decisions, and daily challenges independently, skills she had possessed all along but had avoided using. Emma thrived in her second semester of college, joining the debate team and declaring a major in social work. When she told me about her career choice, she mentioned that her own experience with family dynamics had inspired her interest in helping others navigate complex relationships. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that her path had been shaped by the very situation I had felt trapped by, but her perspective was different from mine. Where I had seen sacrifice and lost opportunity, she saw purpose and calling. Her growth and independence filled me with pride, but also with a poignant awareness of how different our relationship might have been if I had set boundaries earlier. Meanwhile, my own life continued to evolve in ways I couldn't have imagined. My marketing career progressed rapidly, and I was offered a position with significant creative responsibility and leadership opportunities. The job required travel and client interaction, experiences that expanded my worldview and confidence. I also completed my first year of college courses with excellent grades, finally pursuing the psychology degree I had dreamed about for years. The academic work was challenging but deeply satisfying, filling a intellectual hunger I hadn't realized I carried. Michael and I moved in together after dating for 8 months, a decision that felt natural and exciting rather than obligatory. Living with someone as an equal partner rather than a caretaker revealed new aspects of myself I was still discovering. I learned that I enjoyed cooking when it was a choice rather than a chore, that I had strong opinions about home decoration when given the freedom to express them, and that I was capable of both giving and receiving support in balanced ways. A year and a half after leaving home, I received a letter that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my family's perception of my role. It was from my Aunt Sarah, Dad's sister, who lived across the country and had maintained minimal contact with us since his death. In the letter, she revealed that she had been aware of my situation for years and had repeatedly offered to help. But Mom had always insisted that everything was fine and that I was happy with my role in the family. Aunt Sarah wrote that she had wanted to intervene, particularly when I was 18 and considering college. But Mom had convinced her that I preferred to stay home and help with Emma rather than pursue my own education. The revelation was staggering and shifted my understanding of those years completely. I had assumed that no one outside our immediate family understood what was happening, that our dysfunction was invisible to others. Learning that someone had seen my situation and wanted to help, but had been prevented from doing so, was both validating and heartbreaking. Aunt Sarah's letter included an apology for not pushing harder to connect with me directly and an invitation to visit her in California. She also mentioned that Dad had spoken often about my potential and his hopes for my future, dreams he had shared with her but that I had never heard directly from him. Reading about his expectations for my life, expectations that aligned with my own abandoned dreams, brought up grief I thought I had processed. I realized that in sacrificing my education and career for family stability, I had also let down the father who had believed in my capabilities. The letter prompted me to examine my family relationships with new perspective. If Mom had actively discouraged outside support and intervention, then my isolation hadn't been accidental or unavoidable. It had been maintained through deliberate choices that kept me bound to my caretaking role. This realization brought both anger and liberation. Anger at the deception and lost opportunities, but also liberation from the guilt I still carried about leaving. I began to understand that my departure hadn't been selfish or dramatic, but rather a necessary escape from a system designed to keep me trapped. I decided to visit Aunt Sarah during my spring break from college, using vacation time from work to make the trip to California. The plane ride was my first flight ever, another milestone in a life that was accumulating new experiences at a rapid pace. Aunt Sarah met me at the airport, and I was struck by how much she resembled Dad, carrying the same gentle intelligence and warmth I remembered from my childhood. Her home was filled with photos I had never seen, including many of Dad as a young man and pictures of our family from before his death. Seeing those images reminded me of who we had been before tragedy reshaped our dynamics, when I was simply the older daughter rather than the substitute parent. During my week-long visit, Aunt Sarah shared memories of Dad that no one had ever told me. Stories about his pride in my academic achievements and his plans to help me through college. She showed me letters he had written to her, letters that mentioned his hopes for both Emma and me, dreams that extended far beyond our roles within the family structure. Learning about his vision for my future was both painful and healing, connecting me to a parent who had seen me as an individual with unlimited potential. Aunt Sarah also revealed that she had tried multiple times over the years to maintain a relationship with Emma and me, sending birthday cards and Christmas gifts that we had never received. Mom had apparently intercepted these communications, claiming that contact with Dad's family was too painful and that we needed to focus on healing within our immediate family unit. The pattern of control and isolation was becoming clearer, showing how my freedom had been systematically limited to maintain the family structure that served everyone except me. We spent hours talking about Dad, about family history, and about the life I was building for myself. Aunt Sarah expressed pride in my courage to leave and rebuild, but she also shared regret about not fighting harder to maintain contact with us. Her perspective helped me understand that my family's dysfunction wasn't normal or inevitable, that other configurations had been possible if different choices had been made. Returning from California, I felt empowered to address some unfinished business with my family. I called Mom and asked her directly about Aunt Sarah's attempts to stay in contact over the years. The conversation was uncomfortable but necessary, and Mom's initial defensiveness eventually gave way to reluctant honesty. She admitted that she had intercepted some communications from Dad's family, claiming she was protecting Emma and me from painful reminders of our loss. When I pressed her about the specific offers of support and college assistance that Aunt Sarah had mentioned, Mom became angry and accused me of dredging up the past to make her look bad. Her reaction confirmed what I had suspected, that she had knowingly limited my options to maintain control over the family situation. The conversation ended badly, with Mom hanging up after accusing me of being ungrateful and selfish. But for the first time, I felt no guilt about her anger or disappointment. I had learned to distinguish between reasonable family loyalty and manipulative control, and I no longer felt responsible for managing her emotions. Emma's reaction to learning about Aunt Sarah was different and more complicated. She was hurt to discover that we had extended family who had wanted relationships with us, but she also struggled with guilt about the advantages she had gained from my sacrifice. During a long phone conversation, she admitted that she had always known on some level that our family situation wasn't normal, but she had been too comfortable with the benefits to question it seriously. Her honesty was painful but also marked a new level of maturity in our relationship. She asked if I regretted the years I had spent raising her, and I was able to answer truthfully that while I regretted the circumstances that made it necessary, I didn't regret loving and supporting her. The distinction was important for both of us, separating the genuine care I felt for her from resentment about the choices I had been denied. We began to rebuild our relationship on more honest foundations, acknowledging both the love between us and the imbalanced dynamics that had defined our past. 2 years after leaving home, I reached a milestone that felt more significant than any birthday I had ever celebrated. I received my associate degree in psychology with highest honors, walking across the stage to accept my diploma while Michael, Aunt Sarah, and even Emma cheered from the audience. Mom had been invited but chose not to attend, still struggling with what she perceived as my betrayal of family loyalty. Her absence was disappointing but not devastating. Another sign of how much I had grown in my ability to separate my achievements from others' approval. The graduation ceremony represented more than academic accomplishment. It was proof that I could succeed when given the opportunity to focus on my own goals. After the ceremony, Emma approached me with tears in her eyes and said something I will never forget. She told me that watching me graduate had made her realize what I had given up for her. and that she was committed to making sure her own success honored that sacrifice. Her words were healing in a way I hadn't expected, validating my choices while also releasing me from any remaining obligation to justify them. Aunt Sarah had flown in for the graduation, and having her there felt like having Dad's blessing on my new direction. She had become a source of support and encouragement that I had never known I needed, filling a gap in my life that went beyond family relationships to include mentorship and guidance. That evening, we celebrated at a restaurant I had chosen, surrounded by people who supported my dreams rather than questioned my choices. The contrast with family gatherings from my past was striking and liberating. I had built a chosen family of people who valued my happiness and growth, rather than my utility and sacrifice. Michael surprised me during dinner by presenting me with a small wrapped box that contained a key to a house he had found for us to rent. He said he wanted us to have more space as we both pursued our career and education goals, but the gesture felt like much more than practical planning. It was an investment in our shared future and a recognition of my worth as an individual and partner. The house was beautiful, with a home office where I could study, and a garden where I could finally try growing the flowers I had always loved but never had time to tend.